Hello. The chief antagonists that are trying to destroy the rediscovery of Noah's Ark comprise individuals that are associated with the PKK, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, a Marxist revolutionary terrorist organization that is renowned for killing civilians, especially women and children, in order to destabilize the government of Turkey. Also, there are individuals that are trying to denigrate the Ark that have significant ties to the Yazidi community. These are the early brand of Satanists that worship Melek Taus, or the peacock angel, that many in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism ascribe to the devil. Also, secularists and secular academics are very against Noah's Ark discovery, simply because it threatens their majority and dominance over Western thought. Secularism and atheism are totally in control of academia in the West. The fourth group that is trying to denigrate and destroy Noah's Ark has a history of animosity with the rediscoverer of Noah's Ark, namely Ahmet Ertuğrul. First, Randall Price. Randall not only allegedly was physically humiliated by Ahmet Ertuğrul in front of his son, but then Ahmet Ertuğrul took him to a place that was far away from Noah's Ark, and then allegedly stole up to $30,000 from Randall Price. But instead of taking his animosity out on Ahmet Ertuğrul, Randall Price has tried to destroy the archaeological site, Noah's Ark, and the artifactual assemblage in Noah's Ark. For example, at the very beginning, Randall Price said that artifacts were removed from Noah's Ark, and this was totally correct. But then he reversed course, and he said, oh, no, Noah's Ark represents a fraud, which enabled Ahmet Ertuğrul to remove more artifacts from the site. Now, these were all reported to the Turkish government, but this has caused a needless delay in terms of the protection, preservation, and research of Noah's Ark. The second individual is Richard Bright, or Dick Bright. And the reason is, many years ago, Dick and Ahmet Ertuğrul were allegedly accosted by Turkish Jandarma Militarici, thinking that they were PKK, and they were fired upon. Dick Bright has resentment toward Ahmet Ertuğrul for nearly losing his life. But again, instead of taking out their animosity on Ahmet Ertuğrul, they've taken it out on this defenseless archaeological site, namely Noah's Ark. The third person that's involved in this, Don Patton. Don Patton is an individual that is said that he's friends with Randall and friends with Dick. As he said himself, he's going to do whatever they want him to do. But in this case, they're using him to destroy and denigrate a wonderful archaeological site. The fourth person that's involved is an individual named Murat Şahin. He was convicted and spent 10 years in prison for cutting off the ear of a disabled man, and then killing his father, and then shooting the jaw off another individual. And for this, he spent 10 years in a Turkish penitentiary. But again, instead of being very wary of this criminality, this group has been totally used by Murat Şahin to give him money to go on a wild goose chase around Greater Mount Ararat, being nowhere near the southern gorge, which is the actual location of Noah's Ark. And finally, you have a group of young Earth creationists that are very against this rediscovery and are trying to destroy the site because it interferes with their marketing of their replica arks. It threatens to expose some of their views and inaccuracies now that the real Ark has been rediscovered. As an archaeologist, the fact that Noah's Ark was largely unprotected put me and others in a difficult position, because if we expose their lies too much, These groups could hurt the archaeological site that was unprotected, steal artifacts from Noah's Ark, and exchange the artifacts for weapons to kill Turkish civilians and facilitate terrorism and a Marxist revolution within Turkey. But now the site is protected, and I and others are able to address the lies, false allegations, and misleading tactics these groups use and used to destroy and denigrate Noah's Ark. So all groups are working in conjunction and are offering 10 lies which are used to denigrate and destroy this precious archaeological site that represents not only Noah's Ark, a foundational belief in 3 world religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but also represents the transition point between the end of the Stone Age or the Late Epipaleolithic. The site is from 13,100 to 9,600 BC, and the origin or the progenitor site of the Neolithic or the farming age, precisely the beginning of the Pre-Pottery Neolithic A Period. Noah's Ark is located in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat, between 3,900 and 4,700 meters above sea level, 4 to 11 meters under the surface of the gorge. It is 158 meters in length. It certainly is Noah's Ark. First of all, the interior is filled with cages for animals and also perches, or the birds, anywhere from 20 centimeters in width to over 4 meters in width. There are thousands of cages for animals, and perches, or the birds. And we know this from the non-skeletal remains, the feces, the hair, the fur, from every type of animal, mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and insects. There's thousands of animal tracks of every type of animal. Also in the interior of the barge, there's a small habitations for very few humans. And one of the notable characteristics is all the furniture is adhered to the walls. There's no free-floating furniture. It's all attached to the walls, similar to modern barges or other vessels to prevent the furniture from being a safety issue during rough seas. This archaeological site is covered on the exterior and on the interior with bitumen or petroleum-based pitch and also cypress sap, similar to early Neolithic vessels at the Kuwaiti site of As-Sabah during the early Neolithic. Also, this site is definitely a maritime barge in that the exterior of the hull angles inward to the central keel. Also, many walls angle inward toward the central keel. You also have the seafaring woods of Cupressa sempervirens, Mediterranean cypress, oak, and teak. In Genesis, the ark is built of gopher wood, which relates to Corporason in Greek, where we get Cupressus, which is the Latin name of the genus for cypress. The ark is primarily built of cypress. The planks on the exterior are not only aged, but also were subject to tremendous stress. And there is evidence throughout the ark for cypress canker. As cypress ages and is subject to stress, it exudes sap that smells very good, but also provides an additional sealant on the wood. The other woods that are present in Noah's Ark are oak, and in a minority of instances, teak. On the interior, the beams and the cypress wood is crafted softwood, cut down, shaped by stone adzes, and taken right into the ark. And you can see Noah and his family were making flat boards and flat planks shaped by prehistoric stone adzes. Also, in the maritime barge is 3 decks. barnacles are found on the exterior of the hull. There's cross beams throughout the different elevations of the walls to keep the hull intact. Also, there's maritime joinery, specifically coke and dowel or mortise and tenon joinery throughout the vessel. In addition, the barge has large cargo holds that are filled with early types of legumes, namely cicer, chickpea, pisum, pea, and Vicia urvilia, or bitter vetch, which is not common today, but was very common during the transition between the late Epipaleolithic and the pre-Pottery Neolithic. The huge cargo holds are lined with bundles of wattle, tree stems, also lined with clay to act as an early desiccant to prevent moisture from building up in the cargo holds. Another feature is the sloping ramps that lead up and down to the thousands of cages for the different types of animals, and also the perches for the birds. And here there's an archaeobotanical assemblage that is just stunning, representing all the proto and pre-domesticated forms of the cereal grains that comprise the late Epipaleolithic, early Neolithic diet. The site accommodates all the requirements, all the criteria that are mentioned in Genesis, chapters 5 through 10, and also by the Babylonian scholar Berosus. Now that the site has been separated, it was 158 meters when it was together, but is now in an area that covers 2 stadia in width and 5 stadia in length, following the requirements of the Babylonian scholar Berosus. Also, according to Josephus, a Jewish Roman historian, Noah's Ark is braced with cross beams throughout the interior and has plenty of evidence for bitumen on the vessel, which Josephus says is that people took the little bits of bitumen to make talismans during classical times. The site also fulfills one of the mentions in an account associated with Alexander the Great, in that during the summer, the site is located in the midst of an expanse of water when the glacial ice melts in pools at the bottom of the highest plateau in the southern gorge. Also in the Quran, Muhammad mentions the vessel confronted waves as high as mountains. And it's interesting that all along both the starboard and port side, there are ballast features comprising horizontal cypress timbers in front of a linear mass of boulders, but these boulders are from the Levant and comprise sandstone and coral and other sedimentary rock that are totally different from the volcanic lithic material from Greater Mount Ararat. So not only does this site fulfill all the requirements for a maritime barge, but it also fulfills all the requirements in classical archaeology from these ancient texts from Genesis, Berosus, Josephus, Muhammad, and also by a text associated with Alexander the Great. So all of these show very clearly that this archaeological site is Noah's Ark. So let's talk about the top 10 lies that are used by these groups to try to destroy and denigrate the rediscovery of Noah's Ark and inhibit its preservation, its protection, and its research. The fifth great lie by these individuals and groups that are trying to destroy and denigrate Noah's Ark is that the rediscoverer of Noah's Ark, Ahmed Ertuğrul, salted the site, basically took artifacts from elsewhere and brought them to Noah's Ark. This is totally false. Here, Randall Price and Don Patton stated that Ertuğrul took archaeological artifacts and a large piece of wood from Alamut, a medieval castle in Iran, which they claim is 3,500 years old, transported these medieval artifacts from Iran into eastern Turkey, carried the specimens up Greater Mount Ararat to elevations between 3,900 meters, or 12,795 feet, and 4,700 meters, or 15,420 feet, and brought these artifacts into Noah's Ark. Here, both of them show true depravity, terrible evil, and they are absolute apostates. Randall Price, an archaeologist, is trying to denigrate and destroy the greatest archaeological site, the Ark of Noah. First, Price falsely claims Alamut is 3,500 years old, but most archaeologists know the first construction at Alamut occurred in 840 AD, or 2,866 years ago. Price and Patton are 600 years off the mark. Second, Alamut is 561 miles, or 903 kilometers from Greater Mount Ararat, or at least 12 hours and 37 minutes of driving in Iran, and was the headquarters of the Assassins, or Niziri Ismaili state, a branch of Shia Islam whose original leader, Hasan-I Sabah, captured the castle in 1090 AD. The castle was destroyed by the Mongols, led by Hulagu Khan, in 1256 AD. This history is popular with the youths of today because of the Assassin's Creed video games. And there is no way the Faraja, the law enforcement command of the Islamic Republic of Iran, would let Ertuğrul drive 532 miles into Iran, near the capital, Tehran, without stopping him and demanding Tokinipasti, Visato bade bebinam. Who are you? Let me see your visa. Third, Alamut is guarded 24 hours a day by the Vezerat e Marasi Farhani, or the Ministry of Cultural Heritage of Iran, who has a guardhouse at the base of Alamut next to the only path to the archaeological site. Also, Alamut is surrounded by a steel fence. Further, no one is permitted inside Alamut unless they have a badge from the Vezarat-e Marasi Farhani, and the guards know each archaeologist and researcher. Randall Price and Don Patton's false claim that Ahmet Ertuğrul, a Kurd from Turkey who is totally uneducated, speaks very little Persian or Farsi, took away any artifacts from Alamut, especially a large wood piece, is impossible and a complete fabrication. Fourth, Alamut was built by the Ismailis using the natural rock from the mountain itself, supplemented with stone, brick, and tiles, and not wood, as Randall Price and Don Patton falsely claim. Fifth, the pottery of Alamut and other medieval Ismaili sites is very distinctive and comprises glazeware with geometrical patterns. Here are examples of ceramic fragments from Alamut by the Ismaili scholar Namira Diuji. The artifacts have a distinctive glaze on the surface and show various geometrical patterns. Here are more examples of Ismaili artifacts, this time from Lamsar Castle in Alamut in the Qazvin province, again showing a glaze covering and geometric patterns. Lamsar and Alamut were part of a chain of Ismaili fortifications from 1090 to 1256 AD. As such, the pottery, tiles, and artifacts of the Ismailis are very distinctive. And these Ismaili artifacts are totally different compared to the prehistoric Natufian period, 13,100 to 9,600 BC, assemblage such as hammerstones in the interior of Noah's Ark. Artifacts inside Noah's Ark are completely void of any pottery. There are no ceramics from inside Noah's Ark. Instead, the mostly stone, wood, or other organic artifacts from inside Noah's Ark were irradiated by God, some covered with bitumen and resin sealants, and encased in the frozen concentric structures of the Ark under 4 to 11 meters of ice on Greater Mount Ararat. The Natufian archaeological assemblage in Noah's Ark is utilitarian, useful, and practical, definitely not attractive, and consists of palm baskets, grinding stones, wood vessels covered with clay, flax cordage, stone bowls, shallow wood vessels, wood textiles, stone covers for wood cisterns covered with sealants, low-bottom bucket-like wood artifacts, wood vessels filled with salt, wood and bone implements, especially wood scoops, wood mortars, stone pestles, debitage or stone flakes in the manufacture of lithic tools, stone covers for large jug-like wood cisterns covered with vegetal sealant, leather leashes for large animals, small wood bowls covered with sealant, pieces of a wine press for grapes and other fruit. Archaeobotanical remains from the late Epipaleolithic period, 13,100 to 9,600 BC, and tons of animal feces and other animal byproducts from the thousands of cages and avian bird perches within the ancient barge. Further, medieval Ismaili artifacts are totally different compared to the ceramic material from the worship areas next to Noah's Ark, where cultures from the pre-Pottery Neolithic, Pottery Neolithic, Chalcolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age periods, all the way to 1907, left votive ceramic objects representing the most beautiful, worshipful, rare ceramic vessels from palaces and cult sites from all over the Near East and Southwest Asia. Pieces once filled with wine, milk, and seeds, while they worship God near the apertures to the Ark. First, we know the artifacts and architecture inside Noah's Ark are from the late Stone Age, because the legume seeds and the cereal grains exhibit proto-domesticates, meaning they are wild species, or pre-domesticates, interim species, before the seeds or cereal grains were fully domesticated. For example, the chickpea seeds in Locus 3 and 8 in the cargo holds in Noah's Ark are not from the modern domesticated chickpea, Cicer arietinum, but from a hybrid of Cicer reticulatum, a smaller seed with native distribution at the south of the Dead Sea in the southern Levant, with rounded chickpea species, Cicer canariense, which thrives in shade and in ravines, Cicer multijugum, which grows in dry, stony, mountainous terrain, and Cicer songauricum, which favors stony, forested, high altitudes. We will be able to trace the origins of the modern chickpea, Cicer arietinum, because all these seeds are perfectly preserved in Noah's Ark, which is encased in ice on Mount Ararat, while being irradiated by God, who preserved all the specimens as a sign of his return, enabling researchers to trace the origins of the domesticated chickpea, Cicer arietinum, and other domesticated flora. Here is an example of the modern chickpea, Cicer arietinum, which is boiled and roasted in eastern Anatolia, Turkish leblebi, next to a chickpea seed irradiated by God from Locus 3, a cargo hold inside Noah's Ark. The modern domesticated chickpea seed is far larger than the pre-domesticate hybrid species from Noah's Ark. Further, the array of chickpea seeds and hybrids in Noah's Ark with other artifacts such as the teak wood in Locus 3 area B3 show that late Stone Age trade was far more comprehensive before the flood during the transition between the Pleistocene and Holocene geological periods and late Epipaleolithic and pre-Pottery Neolithic A cultural periods than previously thought by most scholars. Also, the proto and pre-domesticated seeds of legumes and cereal grains indicate the level of experimentation that Lamech and Noah practiced to enable vegetation to survive the cursed ground during the Pleistocene, as mentioned in Genesis 5:29. During the Pleistocene, the ground did not have the fertile silt layers later deposited by the flood, and any vegetation during the Pleistocene had to survive the damaging, freezing glacial periods and dry, arid interglacial cycles before the deluge, unlike vegetation during the modern Holocene period with its temperate and seasonal climates. Second, we know the earliest artifacts from the worship areas near entrances or apertures to Noah's Ark have bowls from the pre-Pottery Neolithic and Pottery Neolithic periods, showing that Noah's Ark and its artifacts are from the late Epipaleolithic period. To begin, a gypsum plaster bowl, artifact 0017, was found in a worship area near several entrances to Noah's Ark in area A1. Gypsum or lime plaster bowls, also called Vaisselle Blanche or whiteware, are the precursors to ceramic bowls and are found in pre-Pottery Neolithic and Pottery Neolithic contexts, and are extremely rare because these specimens crumble with age. Here are several examples from archaeological sites in Southwest Asia and Cyprus, compared to artifact 0017 from a worship area at Noah's Ark, where later cultures venerated God at the ancient barge on Mount Ararat. Further, the earliest types of pottery in the Near East comprise coilware, where early ceramic producers rolled clay coils, placed them on top of each other, then smoothed the clay vessels from the interior and exterior, and then baked the pottery in low temperatures, such as a fire. Here, two bowls at Noah's Ark, artifacts 0065 and 0072, were retrieved from worship areas near the barge and are much earlier than other pottery Neolithic ceramics in Near Eastern contexts, which are more elaborate, despite that they're built using the coiling technique. The last example for this discussion are handmade ceramics more elaborate than coilware, the ceramics from Sha'ar HaGolan, which date to the pottery Neolithic from 6400 to 5900 BC. These bowls are nearly identical to artifact 003 and 004, found in a worship area near the Ark, where worshippers visited the Ark, worshiped God, and left these votive bowls behind. Further, XRF data will determine if the temper in the bowls from the worship areas at Noah's Ark are from the geographic locations near Sha'ar HaGolan. To summarize, the artifacts inside Noah's Ark in the Öküz Vadisi, or Ox Valley, on Greater Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey are from the Levant, specifically Israel, near the southern end of the Dead Sea, and Noah was part of the prehistoric Natufian culture during the Late Epipaleolithic Period from 13,100 to 9,600 BC. After the barge, more down in the southern gorge, or Öküz Vadisi, on Greater Mount Ararat in 9,600 BC, later cultures established worship areas near holes leading into the ancient barge and left votive objects of mostly ceramic vessels filled with seeds, wine, or milk, representing different cultures, from the Pre-Pottery Neolithic A Period, 9,600 to 8,800 BC, until 1907. Randall Price and Don Patton are totally lying that the artifacts in Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat are from the medieval Ismaili site of Alamut in Iran, 561 miles away from Mount Ararat. Their lies are just evil. Because what in fact Ahmet Ertuğrul did, just like his Armenian grandmother's family, is Ahmet Ertuğrul removed artifacts from inside Noah's Ark and the worship areas next to Noah's Ark, carried the artifacts down Mount Ararat, and transported these specimens to Doğubayazıt and Istanbul in Turkey, and then removed some of the artifacts to the Republic of Georgia. A series of previous discussions, 10 through 16, were published on how and why the family and militia members associated with Ahmet Ertuğrul's Armenian grandmother removed 1,500 artifacts from Noah's Ark and the worship areas in 1907 and transported these specimens to what is now the Republic of Georgia. Ahmet Ertuğrul's artifact removal from Noah's Ark with a group of 6 to 8 individuals was comprehensive. And here's an example. Here's Locus 14 in Area A1, one of the archaeological food processing areas aboard Noah's Ark. Here's Locus with all the artifacts in 2013. But here are my photos of these artifacts that I took in 2016, not on the mountain, but in Doğubayazıt, at the base of Mount Ararat. So Ahmet Ertuğrul was clearly taking artifacts from the Ark down to Doğubayazıt. And also some of these artifacts were then transported to the Republic of Georgia. So Ahmet Ertuğrul is not salting the site, he's removing archaeological artifacts from the site. And in his estimation, he took over 130 artifacts and then posted a YouTube video about that. So it's a total lie that the site is salted. Rather, there's been artifact removal from the archaeological site, from Noah's Ark, to the base of Mount Ararat, specifically properties in Doğubayazıt, and also artifacts were carried to the Republic of Georgia. So again, a total lie that this site is salted. Ultimately, these lies will be exposed. These individuals that comprise Marxist revolutionaries, devil-worshipping communities, hardcore academic secularists and atheists, and young earth creationists trying to preserve their market share of Ark replicas will fail. You can cancel people, you can cancel ideas, but you can't cancel a 158-meter barge from the late Epipaleolithic period, buried 4 to 11 meters under the surface of Greater Mount Ararat, between 3,900 and 4,700 meters above sea level. And ultimately, this sign for the ages, as mentioned in the Quran, or this sign that represents, just as in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be, the return of God, cannot be hidden, cannot be lied about. My personal aim is to ensure that this site is protected, preserved, researched, and promoted throughout the entire world, and becomes the world's worst kept secret in archaeology. And I hope you do your part to protect, preserve, research, and promote the rediscovery of Noah's Ark, a site that is valuable to 3 world religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and represents the transition point between the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene, the end of the Stone Age and the beginning of the Farming Age, the end of the Late Epipaleolithic Period and the beginning of the Pre-Pottery Neolithic Period, and the origins of civilization.